There's no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform that you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy because Indeed does the hard work for you. They show you the candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your description immediately after you post so you can hire faster. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports, and support the show by saying that you heard it on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
This is a 3-hour-old game.
Yeah, but that's the great thing about this particular season. It just won't end.
One more strike is all Shaw needs. There it is. Sox win.
After making him look bad on a slider, Brian went to the fastball and left Isbell standing there. So the Sox salvage the finale of the series.
Yay! And there was much rejoicing because the season was over and we didn't have them to kick around anymore. But now we do. Now we can take a breather and now we can talk about what happens from here. Dan Bernstein, Laurence Holmes, and if you go to twitch.tv/Chicago670 The Score, you'll see a lot of things. You will see in studio here Josh Nelson of Sox Machine, and then joining us remotely, his partner with Sox Machine, Jim Margalus, and our longtime friend and White Sox expert, James Fegan.
Yeah, and there's the other thing that you need to see is what Josh brought in.
PowerPoint presentation, prepared slide deck.
Like, no BS. He walked in and slapped these PowerPoints on the desk so that look at this work that he has put into this thing.
Rankings by
this is ridiculous.
By WAR at every position and by other stats at every single position for free agency.
I wonder if the White Sox have done this type of work.
I sure hope so.
He's
Do
outlined
not scare me, Lawrence. I don't need that fear. I do not need the fear that nobody at 35th and Shields has done 3-4 hours of work at making a 50-grade PowerPoint and what this offseason could be.
I didn't expect I was coming to a board meeting.
You always make fun of me because I always like a page and notes, so I'm prepared. So if you ask me any questions, I have the data in front of me, so I am ready for you guys. We got Jim Jam as well on the Zoom, so we're covered. We got all the bases covered.
Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, James. Hello, Jim.
I'm glad Josh prepared because I'll be representing the shoot from the hip delegation.
All right, so why don't we start with this? When did you know, and James, I'm going to start with you. When did you know that things were irreparable for the 2023 season?
Oh God. I think when I got terminated, I thought that's when this I don't like I was having this conversation with a player last month, and they were like, hey, remember what I told you in spring training in an interview that we had a lot of urgency coming into this year? I was like, yeah, sure. He's like, we never had any urgency, even in spring training. And I was like, gee, thanks, man. I'm glad you're telling me this now. But so I guess the signs were there in terms of like they never really actually looked sharp in spring training. I know they got framed like Pedro as like they want to see mistakes so they can correct them. We want to see things because we'll address it, which has now become the thing we hear all the time now. But I mean, I'd say that series in Toronto in April, I think we probably covered some high points of the season. Certainly late May, that series that they won in Cleveland, I think they they were probably within 5-6 games or something like that, whereas like you could start to see hope again. But the way they just kind of got waylaid, and the way that they had no ability to stop that losing streak, and there wasn't like, either the resilience in the clubhouse or really just the talent level or consistency pitching wise or the offensive approach to just stabilize or stanch. Any team could have a bad month or losing month, or the way that they couldn't stop that, and the way they were talking in Toronto about questioning the team's identity even at that point. That was probably, I bet if I was in Tampa for that series before the Toronto one, I might have said the Tampa one, but I'd say Toronto, as that losing streak went to 8 or 9 or 15 or wherever it was at that point, was sirens going off.
Same question for you, Jim.
I think I had a little bit of the Homer Simpson following the pig mindset of like, it's just a little dirty. It's still good. It's still good. Just a little wet. It's still good. It's still good. But probably by the end of June, or I guess part of the reason why I thought that is because the Central was so weak. No matter how bad the White Sox were, they're always within like 5-6 games. So theoretically, like 1 week could turn around the season. The Twins kept them within range, and probably by the end of June, when they had that soft stretch that was supposed to make up for the schedule that was so unforgiving in April, and they could barely do better than 500 at any given stretch. Then when the schedule toughened up again in July after the break, it just looked like, well, that was the opportunity to make hay, and they didn't. And sure enough, the half rolled around, weak entrance into the All-Star break, and then they got torn apart by the trade deadline afterwards, and then everything kind of crumbled. So I would say probably the end of June, when they couldn't win a series against Oakland, was when I more or less threw in the towel.
Yeah, hope was lost at the All-Star break. We talked about it during the season when the White Sox got there, that, man, they're starting the second half in Atlanta, and shockingly they won that series, but the writing was on the wall then. And then as a front office, you have to switch gears. And if you're going to start trading guys, in which the White Sox did have a fire sale, it takes a lot of time to be able to do that. So when it got to the All-Star break and Minnesota started to play better baseball, that's when I would think, yeah, this season is toast. And then the trade deadline and all the flurry of moves happened. And then we knew that August and September were going to be brutal. And the crazy week that was in White Sox history occurred, which was a lot of fun to cover. I don't know if it was a lot of fun for those working at 35th and Shields, but boy, everybody outside at 35th and Shields, it was very fun. And then now we have a new front office we got to analyze. So a lot of changes since then. But yeah, I think in the All-Star break, we knew that this season was toast.
So they made those deals ostensibly to make the most out of a lost season and to get closer to winning a championship. Now that the dust has settled and we know what they've gotten in those trades, we know the state of the roster, did it work? Was there any material improvement in the team with the moves that they made?
I will say no at this moment, because, boy, you could really use Jake Berger, especially the way that Jake Berger hit with the Miami Marlins. Listen, for this upcoming offseason for the Chicago White Sox, the plan is very simple. You got to go from a 61-win team to, let's say, projected 86-win team. So you got to improve by the team by 25 wins. Here's the Moneyball math. You got to aim for 775 runs scored, 729 runs allowed. So your offense needs to score 134 more runs this upcoming season than it did in 2023, and you have to allow 112 fewer runs than you did. So that is a big swing as far as scoring more runs and allowing fewer runs. And you are coming into this offseason with the second worst position group in Major League Baseball. And if you didn't have Luis Robert on your team, it would be the worst. You have a bottom 5 pitching staff, and you have arguably the worst defense in Major League Baseball, in which I can already hear James say, well, they didn't have the worst defense, they wouldn't be a bottom 5 pitching staff. And to his point, he is correct. But there's so much work to be done. In order for the 2024 White Sox, coming off a 101-loss season, to match in where they were in 2021, AL Central champions, a playoff team, they have to add 37 to 38 WAR to their current roster. Now, some of that is bounce back seasons from the veterans and the core that you built in order to contend in the first place, but that is also a lot of hope and prayer that guys bounce back, and that's also a lot of activity in free agency and trade that you have to add into this roster to improve upon it. So I don't know what the conversations are now with Chris Getz and Jerry Reinsdorf and what is reality, what's realistic in 2024 entering this offseason. But in the short term, if you're trying to make it to the playoffs in 2024 for the Chicago White Sox, it is going to be an arduous task, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Jim, when it comes to 2024, do you believe the White Sox when initially they said that they were trying to be competitive in the next window in which they can be competitive?
I think Jerry Reinsdorf meant it. I'm not sure if Chris Getz meant it. And it was telling that, Reinsdorf said, we need to go to Chris Getz. We can't go with an outside candidate because they'll need a year and we don't have a year to waste. And then Chris Getz kind of says the same thing during his introductory media conference. But then after about a few weeks in the job, he says well, I'm still doing a deep dive and I'm not, we're still assessing what's going to be best, balancing the short-term and long-term implications for this team in terms of how aggressive to push for it in 2024, which, defeats the purpose a little bit of only going with Getz and not doing a search, but at least reflects, I think, some sanity on Getz's part by saying yeah, this is kind of a mess. It's going to need some untangling. The trades, I think, helped the farm system build up some pitching because before Nick Nastrini showed up and Kai Bush and Jake Eater, not off to strong starts, but at least they're interesting. There was really nothing there. Once Sean Burke was done for the season, Davis Martin underwent Tommy John surgery. Their pitching depth more or less evaporated. So they did do a decent job of restoring some depth there, even though they need some progress. And I'm skeptical about trading with the Angels, given how big of a mess the Angels seem to be, and wondering it's that, if you're picking from them, that might not be good. But I think they made some small strides, but I think it's going to take more small strides. I just think the tough thing is that they wasted their opportunity to do a rebuild and have the fans believe in a rebuild. So they can't say we're going to tear it down. We're going to lose another year on purpose because fans already did that, saw no reward. So if you really want them to just completely disappear, that's the way to do that. So I think they do have to try to avoid using that R word, but they're really, when you look at the amount of ground they have to make up and the lack of on-hand talent ready to take over at the major league level, there really seems to be no way around it.
James, is any of what the White Sox, at least, or what, to be specific, what Reinsdorf claimed that he wanted to do, is any of it possible next season?
Making the playoffs, or what part?
Being a competitive team and being something where people are. He said that he didn't want to wait. Will White Sox fans have to wait?
They can certainly be better. I don't think they can contend next season realistically, and I think even shooting for the division would create bad priorities given where their talent base is. They could be they're getting the least out of so many areas, especially on offense. It's the worst team plate approach in baseball, all around. They swing at bad pitches. They put balls on the ground. They're getting the least out of their offensive talent. I think you could have a team where you're, mostly taking short-term bets to flip at the deadline and really kind of trying to stock the system. And be a lot better if you're just getting more out of your offensive core. If Andrew Vaughn didn't have a 50% ground ball rate or didn't walk 10% of the time, or if you could say something similar about Eloy Jimenez, your offense would look a lot more competitive and a lot more viable on a regular basis, and you'd easily win 75 games and not look like the worst team in baseball all the time. Without necessarily you're pushing all your chips in and pushing all your resources towards contending. They're getting so little out of everybody on offense because the approach is so bad that I think they could look like this drastically improved team next year if they simply were middle of the pack on so many of these big indicators that show why they can't put together a prolonged streak of hot offense that made them the team they're supposed to be the last 2 years. So I think if kind of structural things happened offensively, I don't know how, and I don't know how you expect such a big transformation overnight, but they're so bad, they're so sloppy defensively, they're so bad in their offensive approach that if those things just were brought up to league median, they would all automatically, they'd be we'd have a 75-win team, and people are like, well, they were a year or two away, instead of like they need to raise everything down and rebuild. So I think there's ways where they could raise the floor of what they're doing on a structural level that wouldn't necessarily be like, well, we need to sell our prospects for 30-year-old proven guys, or sign Shohei Ohtani to get better, which we know they won't do.
Thoughts from each of you. Move on from a 31-year-old Tim Anderson at this nadir of his career, or reset and attempt to salvage?
I think I'm of the mind where like both make sense to a certain degree, because in the certain form that Anderson's in right now, like he doesn't do anything well. He doesn't. He's not barreling the ball up well. He doesn't draw walks. He's never drawn walks. Like his defense is too scattershot to support his bat. So when you look at $14 million and trying to figure out like what does he bring the team in this current form, like there's nothing reliable. On the other hand, the market for free agency is so barren in the middle infield, and you still want to like provide Colson Montgomery some time to prove that he's ready for the majors. So like, I don't know if you want to create a vacuum up top that you patch with like, maybe Elvis Andrus comes back. Although I wonder like, whether he's tired of the White Sox experience by now, but it's really tough to try to fill in that hole based on what's available. And I don't know if you really want to trade for anybody, given that you have Montgomery, you have Jose Rodriguez, you have some guys who might be able to handle the position internally. If you're so far away and shortstop's not going to make the difference. So I think it depends on if that $14 million can be spent to better invest in a long-term solution elsewhere, then I think they should move on. I think the shame is that I don't really feel anything about the decision. And I mentioned this on our podcast on Monday, is that like Tim Anderson, at the very least, should make you feel something. Like he's designed to make you feel emotions when you watch him play. And right now I just got nothing.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. This is the worst middle infield free agent market maybe in the history of Major League Baseball. The best free agent right now, strict free agent, no contract options or mutual options, is Elvis Andrus. He's the best. At second base, you'll have to wait to see what Toronto does with Whit Merrifield and what the Minnesota Twins do with Jorge Polanco. That can maybe help you out at second base, not necessarily at shortstop. But Tim Anderson, to bring him back for $14 million, to Jim's point, you're going to have to take that in consideration with the player payroll and the budget that you have going into next season, when TV ratings have dropped by 41% and your TV contract expires at the 2024 season. You had a sharp decline in attendance when everybody else in Major League Baseball saw some type of increase in attendance. So there's some business things that are going on behind the scenes that will influence on how much money Chris Getz will have to spend. I wonder, James, if there is a Carlos Rodon situation here for the White Sox in which they can buy out Tim Anderson for $1 million, wait to see in how the rest of Major League Baseball views Tim Anderson, and come February 1st, if Tim Anderson is still a free agent, bring him back at a lesser deal than $14 million. Do you think that is a possibility?
I guess. I think for Tim, like it's, for one, you distracted me. I don't see how either of you have not already resigned yourself to Whit Merrifield being on the White Sox next year with Pedro Gapol talking about how he's a proven winner and he brings an attitude.
Narcs. James, we've got Salvador Perez jerseys waiting in stock right now. We got minus 250 odds that Salvador Perez is going to be a Chicago White Sox catcher in 2024, man. So you know what? Let's bring it on. I love the idea, James. Whit Merrifield, Salvador Perez, bring on all the Royals, because what an organization to duplicate is the Kansas City Royals.
Angels and Royals.
I think it'd be beneficial for Tim to get out of a situation where there's the expectations to be the player he is, which come with batting leadoff every day, even while he's going through like the worst season of his life and searching for his swing. I think he's a player who lower half injuries in high school pushed him towards baseball, and now you're seeing an accumulation of them over the years. That's kind of making it hard to escape and kind of predicting future problems. I think he was never going to, he's a player whose approach was kind of tilted around utilizing his elite athleticism. I didn't think, his plus age 30 years were necessarily ever going to be the most graceful process. So I think there's like a litany of reasons why I'm not super hopeful about a bounce back, and think maybe an environment where one, he has to prove himself, but also he's not going to be like constantly waiting to flash back to the center of the franchise type of player all the time. Would be good for him, and just to get out of like kind of the rut of these last couple of years. So I think letting him go makes a lot of sense. But I get to the point of like, it's as you said, there's if you let him go, you're basically looking for a 1-year stopgap bounce back candidate at shortstop before Colson Montgomery or some other candidate is ready. And who would be the better bounce back candidate than necessarily Tim Anderson? At least he's done it before. At least he'd actually be interested in being here more than others. And I don't. It's not a fun situation. I do feel something since I've covered the dude, and I've known how much he's been talking. He came into this year talking so many things about trying to alter his approach and add plate discipline and doing things to try to adjust to what was coming for him in his game. And then to see him still get waylaid, it'd be nice to see him be able to stanch the bleeding at some point and find some sort of second act to his career, because he kind of wowed everybody with the way he was able to reinvent himself to become the player he was for a few years there. If he were able to kind of surprise us all again, that'd be very fitting for him. But the indicators, all the lights on the dashboard are flashing red right now, so I don't understand why you don't see a bounce back there.
Well, we'll all feel better after we take a breath and a break, and then
we won't.
And then talk about White Sox pitching. That's because we haven't mentioned what about the pitching? Well, we'll address that next. It's our White Sox Roundtable with the Sox Machine crew and James Fegan and Bernstein and Holmes on the score.
Is managing accounts payable taking up too much of your time? With AvidXchange, your AP is automated so you can easily review and approve invoices anytime, anywhere, giving you more control and visibility into your workflow. Experience the power of change. AvidXchange. Learn more at avidexchange.com.
You're listening to Bernstein and Holmes, middays 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 670 The Score.
An Odyssey station.
It's a little early to comment on what the rotation is going to look like. We know the players to expect back here, and we know the pitchers that are in our system, but we've got some work to do. We've got staff in town. The last couple of days we'll continue to meet throughout this week, and we've got some time before free agency opens up, along with the ability to acquire some other arms. But yeah, that's certainly an area that needs to be addressed. And we like some of the arms we have, and we like a lot of the arms that are coming through our system, and we'll learn more of what we need to do here in the coming weeks to set us up for the offseason.
And we'll never be royal.
Oh, but you might be.
Yeah, you're going to be immediately.
Yeah, I think you are going to be, because you're certainly trending in that direction. That's Chris Getz, and they have brought in a former Royal in Brian Bannister to help out with the pitching. I like Brian Bannister. I really do. Because he was one of the very first active players to really embrace the new metrics of pitch shaping and movement and all the data. And those guys were hard to find. They're not that hard to find anymore, but he's a smart dude. And by the way, son of Floyd, for those of us who are old and remember the 83 team. But let me ask you this. Is Brian Bannister here to help these pitchers? Or is he here to ensure that they've got pitchers 3, 4, 5 years from now?
I think the answer is yes, because he does have some projects here. His first project, I think, is helping get Dylan Cease and Michael Kopech back on track. And looking at just the walk rate. So the White Sox as a team, pitching staff, had the second worst walk rate in Major League Baseball. Who has the best walk rate in the regular season? The San Francisco Giants. So pounding the strike zone is very important when Brian Bannister was with the San Francisco Giants, and that's going to be a focus for the White Sox coming into this offseason for Kopech and Cease, is to definitely shrink as much as they can their walk rate, while also working with Touki Toussaint, because, Jim, I know you've mentioned throughout the season, man, Touki walks a lot of guys. And when you look at the free agent market, I think this is where you could be optimistic with Brian Bannister in tow and working with Ethan Katz. If you are looking for a radical change with this team, I think starting pitching this free agent market has a lot of depth. And if Jerry Reinsdorf's got the appetite and Chris Getz has got the selling skills, I think you can transform this starting rotation overnight. I'm more optimistic that the White Sox can fix the pitching issues that they have from this previous season, but the offense issues is still the bigger issue. But on the pitching side, I'm more optimistic, Dan, that Brian Bannister, along with Ethan Katz, can get this fixed.
James, I want to ask you about Chris Getz. What have people around baseball, around the White Sox organization, told you about him? And what do you think of him as the choice to be the White Sox GM?
If you made me, in June, or just like, back when, Hahn and Williams were there, if you made me choose from like White Sox current employees, which apparently was the process, who to lead the team, he's who I would pick. Like he's someone who has a lot of respect from, scouts of other teams, has a lot of good relationships around the league. Some people who were trying to sell him on me said that, maybe, a lot of time the job of the executive is just to communicate things well to the owner in a way that convinces them, especially with the owner that maybe is has an interventionist streak the way Jerry Reinsdorf is. So the people around the baseball who were trying to talk him gets up to me, like, touted that he might have the ability to do that, and that can be beneficial. But as far as it, I think I'm a bit more encouraged by him than, say, the minor league track record would indicate, but not a ton. Like you also had scouts who said that they didn't view the White Sox player development atmosphere or watching their minor league teams warm up, they didn't seem as intensive, or it seemed like an approach more geared towards trying to let their athletes be athletes and be loose and comfortable, more than like it's very rigid, or you see tons of really focused drills, or you see tons of like intensive, game speed, repetitions before games. So it's not this elite player development engine that they're, that he's been running the last 7 years that, now is being handed promotion. But it's someone that people like, that they think delegates well, that communicates well. That would be the selling point to me. But at the same time, there's been the noticeable black eyes with Helms and Vizquel. There's been not really the progress or a lot of deep finds in the prospect system that's produced major leaguers in some way that's on par with some of the better player development organizations across the league. And you're coming off a season where even some rumbling from coaches is that they had a lot of guys coming up from the minors that weren't prepared and weren't really ready for major league competition. Some of that is just the nature of how the level of organizational depth they have, and the fact that they sold so much of the deadline. But it's just really a mixed bag. I think he's the best candidate from within the White Sox, but obviously it's not the way you should have conducted this broad search of a chance to really remake the organization.
Jim,
I don't know, is what I'm trying to say.
No, I think it's a fair answer. Jim, what do you think?
I'll echo James in that, like, I've heard a lot of good things about Getz. Like, everybody who deals with him personally seems to like him, seems to not get a whole lot of runaround or misinformation, bad information. They think he's a fairly straight shooter. So there is that. I guess also, if you're looking for like a positive spin on what the White Sox haven't been able to accomplish, I guess the Bannister hire would maybe signal that, like, maybe he knows something about like what the White Sox aren't doing, or what they haven't had, what he hasn't been able to provide himself, or with the resources he has on hand, whether financially or whether just the resources of the talent that's around the organization. So if Bannister is, what he usually is, and is engaged and, wants to continue what is a pretty great track record and resume with the Red Sox and then the Giants, like, to sell him on the White Sox job would suggest that maybe Getz does have something to his interpersonal relations, to where like he might be able to close deals or make the White Sox a better place to work, a less closed off place to work. That led to so many dead ends organizationally, like both the major league level and at the minor league level, just like a dearth of ideas. So I like that start. I'm encouraged by that start. I guess the one thing about Bannister that I saw in The Athletic was that part of the reason he took the White Sox job was work-life balance, and he does consulting on the side. And I guess the White Sox were open to having a more flexible schedule. Whether or not that's true, whether that's, what I think it was Andrew Baggerly who wrote that, what the Giants people are telling him that to soften the blow. It did make it for an interesting, introduction when he was talking with the White Sox media, and he didn't mention that. But imagine you can't come into your job and say like, yeah, I took this job because I can work less. So I think that's one thing in my back of my mind rattling around there in terms of like why he would take the White Sox job over continuing with the Giants, who have supported him pretty well. And it seems like a pretty beneficial relationship. But if Bannister can continue doing what he's doing, I think that's a positive first step for Getz in terms of bringing people who can do things that he and the White Sox haven't been able to do.
Josh?
With Chris Getz and the player development being so bad, I'm wondering if this is middle management syndrome here, in which that he's having to explain to Jerry Reinsdorf, listen, I would do more. However, Kenny and Rick didn't give me the resources. So this is where your Game of Thrones plot begins, where you figure out a way to replace them. I know there's that. People think that there's some type of conspiracy theory or whatever on how Chris Getz finally got this job, but he was responsible for player development for the Chicago White Sox. So many of the issues that are in this PowerPoint deck or what we saw on the field that every White Sox fan and everyone else in Major League Baseball sees, that was Getz's responsibility. And if his message to everyone is we're going to get this fixed, then what was the problem when you were the director? Was it not your problem because you didn't have the resources? Are you somewhat throwing Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn under the bus here?
More than somewhat.
I'm trying to be nice. Those are my follow-up questions here on how things are going to get better under you, Chris Getz. But with the hiring of Josh Barfield, and if Getz is like, listen, I'm handing this all off to Josh Barfield, then there's another line of optimism that I have within the Chicago White Sox, because just look at the Arizona Diamondbacks. Josh Barfield was a big part of that rebuild for the Diamondbacks and identifying young players that are athletic. And right now they're up 2-0 on the Los Angeles Dodgers in the NLDS. So I would have more confidence that Josh Barfield could help out in the mid to long term for the Chicago White Sox to rebuild as far as their player development pipeline. But yeah, I still have some questions for Chris Getz on exactly what is the issue here, because Getz, your failings as a director of player development are impacting you, Chris Getz, as general manager in the short term to try to make this team competitive.
Guys, this was special. This is exactly what we envisioned. We certainly didn't envision that you would come in with printed material.
Are you going to post the PowerPoint?
You know what I'll do?
On SoxMachine.com?
I'll put it on SoxMachine.com. I'll put it on social media. It's a little incomplete because I want to write up some about, other creative ideas. Like if the Cubs can't bring back Cody Bellinger, how that could work out for the White Sox and some other guys I want to identify. But yeah, I'll put it out there so people could be really depressed on how bad the middle infield is, but also parse through all the starting pitching options in free agency and be like, oh, yeah, you can rebuild a starting rotation in the offseason. So some pessimism and optimism coming your guys' way.
Not a lot of optimism. Thank you all for joining us. We really do appreciate it. We know you guys have much better things to do than talk about the White Sox.
I don't. That's the sad thing. We don't.
This is what we do. Yeah, see you guys.
That has been our White Sox panel comprised of Jim Margalus, Josh Nelson in studio, and James Fegan.